Did Angel Reese's jealousy single-handedly destroy the WNBA's biggest breakthrough in decades? That's the controversial question gripping fans right now after Caitlin Clark's season-ending injury sent shockwaves across the league. What was supposed to be the golden era of women's basketball has instead turned into a storm of anger, boycotts, and finger-pointing, with Angel Reese caught at the very center. Tonight, we break down exactly how this scandal erupted into one of the darkest chapters the league has ever faced. Caitlin Clark, the undeniable face of the WNBA, entered her second season with sky-high expectations. She wasn't just another player, she was the league's engine, the driving force behind sold-out arenas, record-breaking TV ratings, and the kind of mainstream attention women's basketball had never experienced before. Yet what unfolded over the course of her sophomore campaign was nothing short of a nightmare. A quad strain in May, groin problems through June and July, and finally a devastating bone bruise in August created a snowball effect that ended with Clark being sidelined for the rest of the season. But here's the real controversy. Fans and analysts alike believe this wasn't simply bad luck. This wasn't just an athlete succumbing to the physical toll of competition. No, this was preventable. Repeated targeting, unchecked physical play, and mismanagement by both her team and the league left Clark vulnerable. The narrative isn't about an unfortunate injury, it's about a star who has failed at every turn. And when Clark officially announced she would not return this year, the disappointment wasn't confined to Indiana. It was a gut punch felt league-wide, leaving fans furious, betrayed, and asking one glaring question: was the WNBA complicit in sacrificing its brightest star for short-term gain? When the conversation shifts to who bears responsibility for Caitlin Clark's downfall, one name keeps surfacing louder than the rest. Angel. For months, the Chicago Sky forward leaned into the villain narrative, portraying herself as the rival who wasn't afraid to get physical with Clark. But what fans saw on their screens went far beyond healthy competition. Night after night, Clark absorbed elbows, shoves, and body checks before she even touched the ball. And who was often at the center of those confrontations? Angel Reese, smiling, laughing, and celebrating, as if inflicting pain was an accomplishment in itself. The troubling part isn't just the fouls themselves, but how consistently they were overlooked by referees, creating an environment where Clark was effectively hunted without consequence. Reports even show that during her rookie year, Clark received a staggering percentage of all flagrant fouls league-wide, with Reese directly responsible for many of them. These weren't basketball plays. These were deliberate, targeted attempts to wear down the league's biggest star. For many fans, it looked less like competition and more like obsession. A campaign to knock Clark off her pedestal by any means necessary. And while Reese thrived on the media attention that came with being the so-called villain, the optics were disastrous. What was meant to be a rivalry turned into a spectacle of hostility, and as Clark's injuries mounted, the narrative shifted from entertainment to exploitation. That's why so many point to Reese not just as a competitor, but as a central figure in the toxic culture that ultimately sidelined Clark and damaged the league's credibility. When Caitlin Clark's injury was officially announced, the outrage from fans wasn't just about losing their favorite player, it was about betrayal. The very league that marketed Clark as its golden goose, plastering her face across commercials, merchandise, and ticket promotions, had failed in its most basic responsibility, keeping her safe. Game after game, viewers watched Clark get shoved to the floor, dragged off balance, and hammered on drives to the basket. Yet officials swallowed their whistles. The physicality wasn't subtle, it was blatant, and for many it bordered on assault. Fans on social media compared it to a hostile workplace, where abuse was tolerated because management prioritized profits over protection. In any other job, this would be criminal. One fan wrote, echoing the sentiment of thousands. Parents who once encouraged their daughters to look up to Clark began questioning whether women's basketball was truly a safe place to grow. The hypocrisy cut even deeper because the WNBA proudly touted record ticket sales and sponsorship deals, achievements made possible by Clark's stardom. Yet when it came to defending her from jealousy-driven targeting, they turned a blind eye. This disconnect ignited a firestorm of criticism, with many accusing the league of cashing in on Clark while silently enabling a toxic environment. The result was more than just one player's injury. It was a collective loss of trust. Fans weren't just upset, they were furious, and their anger was now aimed directly at the league office, referees, and yes, Angel Reese herself. If Angel Reese represented the physical targeting, then the league and the Indiana Fever management represented something even more insidious: systemic mismanagement. From the moment Clark entered the WNBA, she wasn't treated like a young player needing development and protection. She was treated like a product, a marketing tool, a walking cash machine. The signs of wear were obvious early on: nagging quad pain in training camp, groin tightness before mid-season, and repeated listings as dated. Instead of pulling her back, resting her, and prioritizing long-term health, the Fever strapped her up and sent her back on the court because they needed her to sell tickets and boost TV ratings. Fans saw through it. Every minute Clark logged, despite clearly hobbling, only reinforced the idea that her well-being came second to the league's bottom line. And when she finally broke down, sidelined with compounded injuries, people didn't call it bad luck, they called it negligence. The WNBA, desperate to ride the Clark wave, burned out their biggest star in barely 13 games, leaving arenas half empty and networks scrambling for alternatives. This wasn't just a miscalculation, it was a monumental failure of leadership. The Fever's medical staff, the WNBA Commissioner's Office, and even Clark's own coaches failed in their duty of care. What fans saw was a league willing to run its prize player into the ground for short-term gains, even if it jeopardized the very future of women's basketball. The anger was no longer confined to Angel Reese's physical play, it extended to the suits and executives who let it all happen. The backlash against Angel Reese didn't just come from her physical play, it exploded after her tone-deaf remarks following Caitlin Clark's season-ending announcement. Instead of offering sympathy or acknowledging the immense loss to the league, Reese turned the spotlight back on herself. She doubled down on the narrative that the WNBA wasn't built on just one player, refusing to even mention Clark's name. "It's because of me too," she said, when asked about the growth of women's basketball. That single statement, delivered in the wake of Clark's devastating news, sent shockwaves through fans and media alike. To many it sounded less like confidence and more like arrogance fueled by jealousy. What stung most was the context. Reese had benefited directly from Clark's star power. Bigger crowds, primetime broadcasts, and the surge in media coverage weren't happening for Chicago Sky games before Clark arrived. Yet here she was, acting as though she carried equal weight in building the movement, dismissing Clark's irreplaceable impact. Fans didn't hear ambition in her voice, they heard pettiness, and that perception hardened quickly. On social media, she was branded as selfish, bitter, and out of touch, with countless posts pointing out that while Clark absorbed the hits, Reese reaped the reward. The timing of her comments couldn't have been worse, and instead of rising to the occasion as a gracious competitor, she made herself the face of envy. In one moment, Reese managed to alienate the very fan base that had briefly tolerated her villain role, exposing herself as someone who seemed to care more about her own narrative than the league's future. If Angel Reese thought her comments would position her as the next face of the WNBA, the reaction from fans proved the opposite. Almost instantly, social media timelines were flooded with criticism. Longtime WNBA supporters, people who had fought for years to get the league the recognition it deserved, accused Reese of being selfish, tone-deaf, and outright cruel in the way she dismissed Caitlin Clark's role. Many pointed to how her fan base gloated online, celebrating Clark's downfall, as though it cleared the stage for Reese to shine. That didn't sit well with the public. Instead of rallying behind Reese, casual fans and mainstream sports voices distanced themselves from her, labeling her part of the problem rather than part of the solution. The villain persona she leaned into during games now looked less like confidence and more like bitterness. To make matters worse, Reese's numbers and draw couldn't back up her attitude. When Clark was on the court, arenas sold out. When she wasn't, attendance cratered, even in Reese's own games. That comparison laid bare an uncomfortable truth. Fans weren't buying tickets to watch Angel Reese, they were showing up for Clark. So when Reese tried to insert herself as equally important, the backlash was swift and merciless. She wasn't seen as a leader seizing her moment, but as a jealous rival trying to profit from someone else's misfortune. And once fans turn on you at that scale, organizing boycotts, booing at games, flooding your social media with negativity. It's nearly impossible to recover. Reese had wanted to be the star of the show. Instead, she became the lightning rod for everything wrong with how the league handled Clark. The numbers don't lie, and they tell a brutal story. Before Caitlin Clark's injury, arenas across the WNBA were experiencing something unprecedented: sold-out games, secondary ticket markets skyrocketing in price, and fans traveling state to state just for a glimpse of the rookie phenomenon. The Fever's road games became traveling spectacles, with host cities doubling their usual attendance just because Clark was in town. TV ratings mirrored the Mania record-breaking viewership, packed primetime slots, and broadcasts that rivaled some NBA game. But the moment Clark went down, everything collapsed like a house of cards. Tickets that once sold out in minutes suddenly struggled to move. Entire sections of arenas stood empty, eerily quiet compared to the electric atmosphere Clark generated. Television networks felt the sting too. Ratings dropped by nearly half, with some games pulling numbers that returned to the league's pre-Clark obscurity. This wasn't just about losing a player, it was about losing the engine that had powered the WNBA's rise to national relevance. Without Clark, the league looked painfully exposed, unable to sustain the attention it had received. And what made matters worse was the optics. Angel Reese was still healthy and playing, yet her games failed to replicate even a fraction of the buzz Clark had created. That contrast reinforced the public perception that Clark wasn't just one of many stars, she was the star. The WNBA had bet everything on her, milked her presence without protecting her, and when she was gone, the entire system cracked. Fans and sponsors alike began to ask the same question: if Caitlin Clark isn't on the floor, is it even worth watching? When Caitlin Clark went down, the media machine went into overdrive, not to hold the WNBA accountable, but to spin the narrative. League-friendly outlets began pushing headlines that minimized Clark's absence, instead highlighting parity and new opportunities for other stars. Articles tried to frame Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, and others as capable of carrying the torch, insisting that the league was bigger than one player. But fans weren't fooled. Social media receipts showed exactly who moved the needle, who sold the tickets, and who brought record-breaking ratings. It wasn't Reese. It wasn't Wilson. It wasn't any other star. It was Clark, and as much as journalists tried to downplay her loss, the empty seats and sinking ratings told the real story. Even worse, some corners of the media actively tried to paint Clark as overhyped, suggesting that her injury could be a blessing in disguise for the league to redistribute attention. That tone only poured gasoline on the fire. Fans saw it as gaslighting, a desperate attempt to protect the league's image rather than admit the obvious. The WNBA had failed its most valuable asset. Meanwhile, every time the press tried to crown Reese or another player as the new face, the public pushed back harder, mocking the forced narratives and demanding honesty. The disconnect between what fans saw and what the media sold only deepened mistrust, making Clark's absence feel even more catastrophic. Instead of transparency, the league leaned on propaganda. Instead of accountability, it leaned on deflection. And the more the media spun, the more obvious it became. Without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA was grasping at straws. If ticket sales and ratings painted a grim picture, the sponsorship landscape revealed an even harsher reality. Corporate partners didn't sign on to the WNBA because of vague promises of growth. They signed on because of Caitlin Clark. She was the face plastered across commercials, the player featured in primetime ads, the reason brands like Nike, State Farm, and Gatorade suddenly saw women's basketball as a lucrative investment. But once Clark was sidelined, the ripple effect was immediate. Some sponsors quietly scaled back activations tied to Fever games, shifting ad budgets elsewhere. Others renegotiated contracts, citing reduced visibility as attendance cratered. Even national campaigns featuring Clark suddenly looked awkward, airing during games she wasn't even playing in. This created a financial vacuum the league wasn't prepared to fill. And it wasn't just the big corporations pulling away. The smaller regional businesses that banked on Clark's appearances in sold-out arenas also took a hit. Merchandise sales plummeted, with Clark jerseys sitting unsold where they once disappeared in hours. The brutal truth was undeniable. Caitlin Clark wasn't just a player, She was the economic engine of the WNBA, and when that engine shut down, the entire system sputtered. The league had been unprepared for the possibility of losing her, and their failure to protect her health now carried not just sporting consequences, but financial ones. The fallout wasn't theoretical. It was measurable, immediate, and devastating. What was once framed as the WNBA's golden era now looked more like a bubble bursting, all because the very star who fueled it was left unprotected and broken down. Now we arrive at the most important and uncomfortable question. Where does the WNBA go from here? For Caitlin Clark, the road ahead is both uncertain and monumental. If she recovers fully, she could return stronger than ever, carrying the league once again on her shoulder. But injuries have a way of reshaping careers, especially when mishandled early, and fans are already haunted by the possibility that we may never see Clark at her peak again. The pressure on her is immense, but the pressure on the league is even greater. The WNBA must confront the truth. It built its surge of relevance almost entirely on Clark's back, yet failed to protect her in the process. Going forward, there are only two paths. Either the league reforms, investing in better medical care, prioritizing player protection, and finding sustainable ways to market beyond a single star, or it risks crumbling under the weight of its own negligence. Fans are watching closely, and many are already demanding accountability. As for Clark, her legacy is already cemented as the player who changed women's basketball overnight. Whether she becomes the league's Michael Jordan or its greatest what-if now depends not only on her resilience, but on whether the WNBA finally learns from its mistake. Because one thing is certain, if the league doesn't evolve, if it keeps chasing short-term gains at the expense of player health, then Caitlin Clark's injury won't just be a tragedy. It will be remembered as the turning point where the WNBA's golden moment slipped through its fingers.